Last time we kind of got to a point where Machen was arguing for the need for an awareness of the law of God and its work on the heart in exposing our sin in order for us to be able to see and understand the truth of Christianity. He was arguing against the point of view that says that the natural man can use his scientific reasoning to evaluate the truth of Christianity and on the basis of that come to a conclusion, right or wrong, for Christianity. And Machen is saying not so. You have to take into account the noetic effects of sin. That is, how sin has corrupted and distorted the way we think, so that we're not thinking straight, we're not seeing things as we ought to see. So, for example, coming back to the scientist operates out of a naturalistic worldview. And so he sees that the scientific method looks at the world in a materialistic way, and you just repeat your experiments, you come to common conclusion, and you make your statement about what you've discovered. So science is materialistic, it's naturalistic, and so with those presuppositions going in, you automatically dismiss the idea of miracle, of God's intervention in time and history and space. You read those things out because we don't see those things happening today. So there's a concurrent idea of the uniformity of natural causes, which says that we look at the world based on what we see and experience today. So the scientist sees the way that history works today, and then postulates that the past is the same as the present. And so with that materialistic, naturalistic understanding of things, such that, well, I've never seen miracles, I've never seen people rise from the dead, so those things do not happen. They are just rather the response of a superstitious age that imposed their kind of wild ideas and fancies upon the man Jesus, and made him into a god and made him into a Christ, and put together this redemptive scheme of salvation, which is all mythology. It's all superstition. And so to the modern scientists, we dismiss all these things out of hand because they don't fit into our worldview. And so you go way back and you look at an evolutionary beginning to the world rather than a creation by God. You dismiss the idea of a global flood under Noah that could not have happened. You dismiss the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with fire from heaven. The conquest of Canaan, you might have some questions about in terms of the scope of it. And certainly the crossing of the Red Sea by Moses and Israel to escape Pharaoh and the Egyptians, that too is dismissed. And so they look at the Red Sea and they find very shallow waters and think, well, that might be where they crossed, or some other explanation. So they look at the past from naturalistic eyes and dismiss evidence of supernatural activity. And Machen says the reason that they hold this point of view is that they think that human reasoning is okay on its own. It can interpret the world fine. It makes its mistakes in logic and reasoning, but with care and with refinement, we can come to an understanding of the world. And so man's natural reasoning is fine. There's no problem with it. Christianity comes in and says, no, the mind of man is not morally neutral. It's not theologically sound. It has its own worldview, its own blinders on, and it only sees so much. And so it's a poor judgment to think that man by his reasoning can come to a full knowledge of the truth on his own. Now, we do not accept the ideas of the Roman Catholic, which says that the mind of man is able to reason so far through the philosophers and the scientists and so forth. They get us thus far to an explanation of God and religion and these kinds of things. And then after that, the church steps in, has a big leap right here, and you go up into the area of authority. And now the church comes in and says, on the basis of the church's authority, we proclaim that God exists, that these are morals, and that sort of thing. And so with Romanism, you have Thomas Aquinas back in the 12th century making this great division between science getting us so far, and then religion and faith taking us the rest of the way. And so Machen and those of us who follow after him, and certainly those before, reformers, believe that the natural man in his science is corrupted, so he's not going to lead us up towards faith, in materialistic terms, and then faith can come in and take over from there. His reasoning is corrupted, and so he's leading us away from faith, and is not going to bring us to the doorstep of the church. So Machen's point then is that there needs to be a consciousness of the impact that sin has on the human heart and mind, how it corrupts and pollutes our thinking, distorts our reasoning, gives us an agenda, a bias, inner hostility towards the truth of Scripture, to the nature of God, to his activity in the world, and these kinds of things. The natural man is hostile to these things. As Paul says it, he suppresses the truth about these things, hides them with his science, with his philosophy, with his own sorts of religious beliefs and so forth, suppresses that truth in his own mind, and explains the world, or attempts to explain the world, without reference to God and his revelation. So Machen is arguing for the fact that we need to have the law of God sound forth with clarity in our day, so that it might convict people of their sin and show them the weakness of the human intellect. I think he pointed out last week in our reading that we need that awareness of our sin in order to appreciate the glory of Christ and his sinless nature, how he is different from us. And so our own sin will help us to appreciate the sinlessness of Christ, and also bring us to repentance for what we've done. So let me get this page up in front of you. I'm battling.
Pastor?
Yeah, go ahead.
We just heard from Chuck.
Yeah.
He's at St. Luke's Hospital. Tamer had some issues.
Oh, dear.
And he just called from there.
Okay.
We haven't heard any more yet. He's as soon as he finds out what's going on, he'll let me know. But I got to drop off. I got to go talk to my other son and my daughter-in-law. And as soon as I hear something, I'll get back.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck. God bless. We'll be praying for everybody out there. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye. So, I hope Tamer's okay. I hope there's nothing serious. Okay, so we'll continue here. We come to this statement that Machen makes here in our book, which I've outlined in yellow here. Thus, even in order to exhibit the truth of Christianity at the bar of reason, it is necessary to learn the lesson of the law. It is impossible to prove first that Christianity is true, and then proceed on the basis of its truth to become conscious of one's sin. For the fact of sin, it is itself one of the chief foundations upon which the proof is based. So, I think what Machen is doing here is arguing from kind of our experience of coming to faith in Christ and becoming aware of the truth of Christianity. And that comes through the avenue of the convicting work of the law on our hearts, the realization that we are sinners, and our need for salvation through faith in Christ. And the Spirit illumines us as to who Christ is, and we come to him. And so in that experiential way, we come to a knowledge of Christ. If you want to argue it, just from the aspect of logic and reasoning, you could say, well, you got to have the mind being illumined in some way to understand. But truly, Machen is right. There is this sense that our sin needs to be exposed in order for us to be ready to see the truth of Christianity and be prepared to acknowledge that truth. One way of looking at this is through the lens of the Ordo Salutis. I was going to say sola scriptura, get my Latin phrases wrong. the Ordo Salutis is the order of salvation. It's a way of outlining the progress of salvation in the heart of the individual. And it's a logical arrangement, but there are things that happen all at once rather than one sequentially, one after another. And so in Reformed thinking, you have the call, which is general and special, the general call of the gospel to men and nations, and the special call to the elect, bringing them to faith in Christ. There is conversion, which includes repentance and faith. And then there is justification, adoption, sanctification. Some include perseverance. I would say that's part of sanctification. And then glorification. So you kind of go through this list and say, okay, this is the way we progress from general call, repentance, faith, exercise of faith, conversion, regeneration, and then justification, adoption, so forth. But many of these things happen kind of all at once, in our experience. The call of God, this special call of God comes and immediately produces faith within our hearts, enables us to see our sin, trust in God's statement about who we are, and then looks to Christ for salvation. And then our salvation, our justification, is a once and done thing where God declares us just and righteous in His sight, but at the same time we are adopted into the family of God. It's not like something else happens later on. We are immediately adopted and made God's children through faith. And so you have the legal declaration that we are righteous in God's sight. We have also another legal act when we are adopted into the family of God. These all are happening at once. Then sanctification begins immediately with our justification. We're set apart for God. We have the Spirit come to dwell in our hearts and lives, and we are empowered then to live a new life. So, we separate them to kind of logically think through them and explain them. But in our experience, that it pretty much all comes, pretty much at one point. So, Machen, I think, might be working out of that kind of framework where he says that in order to see the truth of Christianity, there needs to be that inward work of the law and the awareness of sin to convict us of our sins, and that's kind of what opens our eyes to see the truth of Christianity. Well, let's follow him and allow him to make his own argument. When that fact of sin is recognized, and when to the recognition of it is added a fair scrutiny of the historical evidence, then it seems thoroughly reasonable to believe that Christianity is true. Anyone whose mind is clear, no matter what his personal attitude may be, will, we think, accept the truth of Christianity. But no one's mind is clear who denies the facts of his own soul. In order to come to the Christian view of Christ, it is necessary only to be scientific. But no one can be truly scientific who ignores the fact of sin. So, quite often in our modern age, when we talk about science, we view it monolithically, the way that's presented in public schools today and the universities and so forth, which evolutionary science, materialistic worldview, all these kinds of things, and that's science. But in fact, true science is that which is based and founded upon Christian truth claims, the existence of God, His ordering of all things according to His own mind and will, and that enables us to explore the world and see what's going on. The scientist says, well, you can't put religion in because that stops all scientific inquiry. If there is a God who created all things, then why bother studying Earth's origins? Well, the Christian is not afraid to study Earth's origins. We're confident that they will demonstrate the fact that God indeed did create the heavens and the earth, that we have a young earth rather than the ancient earth of billions of years and with a slow evolution over time. We have an immediate creation, a young earth, and the origin of our species in the creation of our first parents, Adam and Eve, a special creation made in God's image. And so we don't see a gradual evolution of man from apes and animals, but we see him immediately created and above the animal world. So the Christian scientist goes back and he looks at the world and he sees how it reflects the truth claims of Scripture about human origins. And as well, we begin to see how the claims of the scientist towards an ancient earth over billions of years and the evolution, all that is wrong. It does not take into a wide variety of things into account. It just dismisses them because they have blinders on. They only see what they want to see. And so anything that would conform to the idea of a special work of creation for Adam and Eve, a special creation for the world itself at the hand of God, all that is dismissed, reinterpreted, reevaluated, and so forth from the naturalistic science. So the point I'd like to make along with Machen is that there is a true science. It's founded on Christian principles, and it's only on the basis of Christian principles that you can have science at all. Many scientists don't think about the underlying principles on which they base their science. The evolutionary process, no absolute truths, truth is relative, and so once you get into that, you really don't have any foundation for science. But it's a whole other discussion. So continuing, we are not ignoring the emotional and volitional aspects of faith. We are not denying that as a matter of fact, in humanity as it is actually constituted, an intellectual conviction of the truth of Christianity is always accompanied by a change of heart and a new direction for the will. That does not mean that Christianity is true only for those who thus will to accept it, and that it is not true for others. On the contrary, it is true, we think, even for the demons in hell, as well as for the saints in heaven, though its truth does the demons no good. But for a thing to be true is one thing, and for it to be recognized as true is another. And in order that Christianity may be recognized as true by men upon this earth, the blinding effects of sin must be removed. Let me stop there on a very long paragraph. So what Machen is trying to avoid, we're talking about how there needs to be this conviction of sin, the illumination of the eyes in order to be able to see the truth of Christianity. That doesn't mean that Christianity is simply a personal thing, a personal experience. You have your experience, I have mine, and so forth. No, Christianity is objectively true, whether we believe it or not. So the atheist may reject it and go on his way, but he's just rejecting the truth. He's wrong. Christianity is objectively true. It stands there on its own terms. And so it's really a matter of whether we recognize its truth or not. So Machen continues, the blinding effects of sin are removed by the Spirit of God. And the Spirit chooses to do that only for those whom He brings by the new birth into the kingdom of God. Regeneration, or the new birth, therefore, does not stand in opposition to a truly scientific attitude toward the evidence, but on the contrary, it is necessary in order that that truly scientific attitude may be attained. It is not a substitute for the intellect, but on the contrary, by it, the intellect is made to be a trustworthy instrument for apprehending truth. The true state of the case appears in the comprehensive answer of the Westminster Shorter Catechism to the question, what is effectual calling? The answer is, effectual calling is the work of God's Spirit, whereby convincing us of our sin and misery, enlightening our minds in the knowledge of Christ, and renewing our wills, He doth persuade and enable us to embrace Jesus Christ, freely offered to us in the gospel. That does justice to all aspects of the matter. Conviction of sin and misery as a prerequisite of faith, the enlightening of a mind blinded by sin, the renewing of the will, and all these produced by the Spirit of God. So regeneration is necessary in order to have a true science. in order to be able to appreciate true science. And this is the work of the Spirit of God within the heart. So, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Just to back up a little bit, where he says in the second paragraph on page 135, the conviction, if I'm reading it properly, an intellectual conviction of the truth of Christianity is always accompanied by a change of heart and a new direction for the will. So, but you remember, I'm trying to say, can't a person see the truth of Christianity but suppress that knowledge? They suppress it.
Right.
So you can see, you can have that intellectual assent. Remember the old what was it called? The evangelism explosion.
Yeah.
They used to talk about how it's more than an intellectual assent.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm confused here where he says that it's always accompanied by a change of heart and a new direction for the will. Maybe I'm looking at the context wrong.
Go
ahead.
When he speaks of an intellectual conviction of the truth of Christianity, he's saying more than just, it's kind of like what you were getting at. He's saying more than just simply an awareness of what Christianity teaches, and maybe a deep recognition that that is true, but a suppression of that. He's talking about genuinely acceding to the truth of Christianity, believing it, and that's why he talks about it's always accompanied by a change of heart and new direction of the will. You're right. Paul says in Romans chapter 1 that God's nature is revealed to all men. This is an infallible revelation. They know deep down in their hearts that God exists, what his nature is, and that they are accountable to him. But while that knowledge is there deep within their nature, they suppress that through their unbelief, by their wickedness, their unrighteousness, and so forth. So I think the intellectual conviction of truth that Machen is talking about is a denial of that suppression and a willingness to yield to the truth of that Christianity and follow after it.
Okay, so he's talking about a heart that's already been regenerated, and
right.
and then makes that, and that brings that conviction.
Right, exactly.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is where we're at. Okay. Yeah, all that illumination, that regeneration is produced by the Spirit of God. So, Machen goes on. In the second place, instead of following the purely intellectual way that has just been discussed, men sometimes try to come to Christ through the sense of beauty. So, what Machen is doing is handling objections here at this point in time. The objection that, well, man can discern the truth of Christianity on his own, using his intellect, without any regeneration, without any renewal or anything like that, just on its own terms. And so he's tried to argue against that and said, no. The human heart is corrupted by sin. It cannot function neutrally and come to the right conclusion. It will always actually yield the wrong conclusion because of its inner hostility to the truth of Christianity. So you can't just follow the intellect. So then the second approach is offered by liberals, basically in Protestant liberal church. So the intellectual way is put aside. Then he says some look to Christ through a sense of beauty. Let me just read Machen and we'll go from there. And indeed it is a beautiful thing, this life of Christ, rising like a fair flower amid the foulness of the Roman Empire, this strange teaching, so simple and yet so profound. But there is at least one objection to the sense of beauty as the way of approach to Christ. It cannot be forced upon those who desire it not. There is no disputing about tastes. One man may admire Jesus, another may prefer the pagan glories of ancient Greece or of the Italian Renaissance. And if it is a merely aesthetic question, no universally valid decision can be attained. If the way of approach is merely through the sense of beauty, then the universality of the Christian religion, at any rate, must be given up. So, as he raises the question in the next paragraph, is the life and teaching of Jesus, moreover, so beautiful after all? When he's talking about beauty, he's not talking about the physical appearance of Christ and that sort of thing. And you know, and sometimes in the evangelical world, you have these pictures of a man praying and say that's Jesus, and look, flowing hair, very handsome Scandinavian looks, and so forth. Certainly not Scottish. But anyway, that's not the beauty that is being spoken of here. It's the beauty of Christ's ideas of loving God and loving your neighbor and doing good, bearing reproach, you know, turning the other cheek and that sort of thing. That's the beauty that they're talking about. This kind of life of love in the midst of a world filled with grime and dirt and revenge and violence and all this there in the empire of that time. So this wonderful beauty of this message contrasts with everything else that's all around it, and say, well, there you should be attracted to Jesus because of the beauty of his message, the beauty of his life, how he laid down his life for his friends and so forth, and what a wonderful thing that is. Well, Machen begins by saying basically beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and that applies not only to women but also to philosophies and to different things. So the natural man may look at Jesus and not find him particularly beautiful. In fact, you read some of the books I got behind me here from secularists and skeptics, you'll find that there's a real hostility towards at least the traditional understanding of Jesus and the traditional understanding of Christianity through time. So continuing, is the life and teaching of Jesus, moreover, so beautiful after all? Now, Machen is going to bring up, if you will, the muck and the tough spots of Jesus, and ask, okay, is this really the beauty that you are talking about? Jesus said some things that offend the sensibilities of many people, as when he spoke of the outer darkness and the everlasting fire, and of the sin that shall not be forgiven either in this world or in that which is to come. These things cannot be called exactly pretty, and by many men they are simply ignored. That's mainline Protestant liberals who only focus on what they want to see from Jesus and dismiss everything else, again, as a product of the age in which Jesus lived. These things cannot be called exactly pretty, and by many men they are simply ignored. Some years ago I heard a preacher who, after the customary abuse of Calvin and others, obtained a smile from his congregation by quoting something that Cotton Mather had said about hell. The question that might have occurred to me as I listened was why the preacher had to go so far afield. Why should he have had recourse to Cotton Mather? Mather was a 17th century American Puritan, a New England Puritan. Why should he have recourse to Cotton Mather when Jesus would have done just as well? There are words of Jesus about hell, just as terrible as any that can be found in the writings of the theologians. And those words might have obtained as good a smile from that congregation as the words of Jonathan Edwards or Cotton Mather or the rest. So I don't know what quote the preacher had from Cotton Mather or Jonathan Edwards. I suppose it was a rather lurid quote about the horrors of hell, and the preacher probably held that up as kind of a fanciful description of things, and something to be laughed at as part of the mindset of that age, that sort of thing. It's probably the direction that the quote went to. But Machen's point is, if you want to talk about hell, you can go to the words of Jesus himself. And I think what you'll find is, if you go to the words of Jesus, that he speaks about hell more than most anyone else in all of Scripture. So if you love the example of Jesus, do you love the fact that he's one who warns people of hell, the wrath of God for sin, weeping and gnashing of teeth, the eternal darkness, all these kinds of things? Machen continues, there is, however, one class of persons from whom these words would have obtained no such smile, and to whom they would have seemed not to mar one whit the beauty of the teaching of our Lord. These are the persons who have passed through the strange experience of the conviction of sin, the persons who hold the same view of sin and retribution that Jesus held. To such persons, and to such persons alone, the beauty of Jesus is without a flaw. That beauty cannot be appreciated without a knowledge of the holiness upon which it is based. And the holiness is unknown except to those who have been convicted of their own sin through learning the lesson of the law. So rather than looking on this message of the wrath of God to come and eternal state in hell as some sort of wild, lurid imagination on the part of Jesus, but especially some of his more flamboyant followers, the believer in Christ will see this with gratitude, that he has taken the time to warn us of the wrath to come so that we might be saved. When you have somebody who speaks against the general way of talking and who exposes the errors of that and reveals the truth of the judgment to come and warns you to flee, and you take refuge in what he has to say and you find deliverance from the wrath to come, would you not then look to Jesus and be so thankful that he himself personally said to flee the wrath to come? That adds to the beauty of the Lord Jesus, that he would endure the mocking and hostility of men by lovingly being prepared to tell us really what's coming and to warn us of what is ahead so that we might be saved. We'll be forever grateful that he did that. So Machen has dismissed this idea that the natural man or the mainline Protestant liberal says that the beauty of Jesus is that which should appeal to us and have us following him. I think he's probably listening to some of the sermons from Henry Emerson Fosdick of his day, or Henry Van Dyke, and some of the others in his day, the great liberals who were occupying these pulpits and attracting vast crowds to them. And they speak in these florid terms of the loveliness of Jesus, how he gave us a wonderful example and taught us to love, and these kinds of things. And they're misleading people because they're preaching a different Jesus. And not everybody's going to be following after this meek, namby-pamby Jesus who has no standards and for whom there's no consequences if you disobey him. There'll be no respect for a Jesus like that. They do more harm than good by presenting that kind of a Christ. So Machen moves on in the third place, and he says, men try to come to Christ through the desire for companionship. They seek in him a friend who will be faithful when other friends depart. But companionship with Jesus is not always the comfortable thing that it is sometimes thought to be. Jesus did not always make it easy to be a disciple of him. Let the dead bury their dead, he told the enthusiast, who came eagerly to him, but was not willing at once to forsake all. One thing thou lackest, he said to the rich young ruler, and the young man went sorrowing away. Quote, he that is not with me, he said to men who wanted to enjoy his companionship without definitely taking sides, is against me. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children, he cannot be my disciple. It is a very serious thing in those Galilean days to be a disciple of Christ. So I think, I'm not quite sure where Machen was going with this. Was he having the liberal pulpit in mind, or maybe something of what he hears in more of the evangelical Arminian pulpits, where Jesus is a friend closer than others, and you have all these warm and fuzzy notions given of how he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I'm his own, and these kinds of things. You have these very warm, friendly descriptions of Jesus, but Machen reminds us that Jesus is sovereign. He is a Lord, and he commands us to follow him and to forsake all to that end. So it's not just having a nice conversation with a friendly theologian, but we're having to follow the Lord himself. So this idea of companionship and the friendship of Jesus is not all that perhaps people think it is. But beyond that, as I was reading this, I was thinking, well, the mainline Protestant liberal has got to have a problem with an idea of the possibility of companionship with Jesus. They deny his resurrection. So at best, they think, well, his spirit, his soul has gone off into the great migration, wherever that is in the celestial spheres. At best, that's their idea of a resurrection of Jesus, or even better, he's with us in our hearts as well as we remember him. But what kind of companionship is that? I mean, I love my dear mother. She's no longer with me, so I don't have, all I have is some memories of her, and that's it right now in terms of any companionship. That's not a companionship. It's not like I can sit down with her and have a conversation or anything. The modern liberal really has no place for this idea of companionship with Jesus. That's kind of a religious relic that they're trying to hold on to give perhaps some facade of spirituality and soothe the angst of the present world and that sort of thing.
It sort of reminds me of C.S. Lewis in his Tale of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He describes Aslan as he's loving, but you don't cuddle up with a lion.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not putting it the way C.S. Lewis does, but the idea is that there's something about Jesus that you just can't approach him, or you just can't think that he's just going to throw his loving arms around you every time that you're with him.
Right.
He's like a father who, yes, can be very loving and all, but sometimes can be, expecting you to behave, expecting you to toe the line and so forth. And we have to. That's where the liberal misses the point about Jesus. He's just a big loving teddy bear, not necessarily God in human flesh.
That may explain why it's easier to run a Mary.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
From Roman Catholic perspective. I saw a video on Instagram of a lion with its pride, about 7 or 8 lionesses walking with him, and he's in control. He's got all these lions all around him and everything, but he's the one that's in control with the big mane and everything. That's quite an animal. So I can see how C.S. Lewis makes those kinds of comments. In some sense, he looks like a cuddly little kitty cat. No way. You want to get near him. Treat him with respect.
But when a lion roars, you know you don't want to get close to him.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yep. Okay, continuing here. And it was a serious thing, not only in the sphere of conduct, but also in the sphere of thought. There could be no greater mistake than to suppose that a man in those days could think as he liked and still be a follower of Jesus. On the contrary, the offense lay just as much in the sphere of doctrine as in the sphere of life. The exclusive claims of Jesus, that a man should, if necessary, forsake all to follow him, were grounded in the stupendous view which he held of his own person and mission. No man could really enjoy the companionship of Jesus who did not admit his absolute sway. There's the lion of the tribe of Judah. There were some indeed to whom his yoke was easy and his burden was light. There were some who rejoiced in his lofty demands as the very hope of their lives. These were the men who had come under the conviction of sin, the sinners, who without a plea, except in his mercy, heard the gracious words, "Thy sins are forgiven thee." As it was then, so also it will be today. The companionship of Jesus is indeed a gracious thing for burdened souls, but it is a terrible thing for those who have any trust in a righteousness of their own. No man can call Jesus friend who does not also call him Lord, and no man can call him Lord who could not say first, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." At the root of all true companionship with Jesus, therefore, is the consciousness of sin, and with it the reliance upon his mercy. To have fellowship with him, it is necessary to learn the terrible lesson of God's law. So you see how Machen again drives us back to the law of God and the vital importance of that law and the preaching of that law. I think so often in Reformed pulpits today there's a lack of the preaching of the law of God, and the need for the conviction of sin for all the corruptions in our nature. There needs to be this work of the law in people's hearts so that they come to see the grace of the gospel, the magnitude of God's love, and the wonder of the salvation that he provides for us in Christ. And apart from that work of the law in the heart, we just don't really appreciate all of that as we should. And just to follow up, Machen pointed to the fact that the companionship of Christ has to do with our beliefs about him as well as behaviors. And so if we're going to be his companions, then we need to accept him as he presents himself to us in Scripture. And I think Machen's going to get into that a little bit more here, so let me not steal his thunder, as it were. I'll follow through. Finally, men seek to come to Christ through the desire for a worthy ideal. Indeed, that way is just now the most commonly followed of all. Quote, "I may not be very orthodox," says many a modern man, "but I am a Christian because I believe that the principles of Jesus will solve all the problems of my life and also the problems of society." So here's the idea of a worthy ideal. Jesus presents a view of human society, a renewed world living in peace and in love and prosperity. And so these principles are what need to be followed. The most obvious objection to this way of approach to Jesus is that it will not work. An ideal is quite powerless to a man who is under the thraldom of sin. And the real glory of Jesus is that he breaks that thraldom, and instead of giving merely guidance, as an ideal would do, gives also power. There is, however, also another objection. Jesus, it is said, can be taken as the supreme and perfect ideal for humanity. But is he really a perfect ideal? There is one difficulty which modern men find about taking him as such. The difficulty due to his stupendous claims. There can be no doubt in the mind of a historian who examines the facts but that Jesus of Nazareth regarded himself as the Messiah. And there can also be no real doubt but that he regarded himself as the Messiah not merely in some lower meaning of the term, but in the lofty meaning by which it is designated the heavenly Son of Man, the glorious figure who appears in the 7th chapter of Daniel in the presence of the Ancient of Days. This Jesus of Nazareth, in other words, who is to be taken as the supreme moral ideal of the race, actually believed, as he looked out upon his contemporaries, that he was one day to sit upon the throne of God and be their judge, and the judge of all the earth. Would not such a person have been, if not actually insane, at least unbalanced and unworthy of the full confidence of men? So this idea of Jesus as being the ideal man that we should follow and the example that we should set in his teachings and also in his person flounders when you understand who he was. And should we really be following him in every aspect of his life? He claimed to be the judge of all mankind. He claimed to be God, the Son of God, in a unique relationship with God the Father. Is this the one that we think is the ideal man? When you look at all these different claims, you'd have to say, unless they're true, these are the claims of somebody who's a lunatic, somebody who needs to be put into an insane asylum. How can you say you're God equal to Father, the infinite God, knowing all things and so forth, all powerful, all wise, and all this? That's just beyond reason, sensibility. Somebody like that is just full of himself, to be sure, even beyond that. So it does not really match this ideal portrait that the modern wants to present. I think this is the end of... I think we'll wait here to continue. We'll finish up here for today and try to get to the end of the chapter next time. So I'll just turn it over if you have any comments or thoughts. Otherwise, we can just move on.
Well, the cult leader can make similar claims,
Yeah.
but they can't back them up with the miracles, and especially, of course, the resurrection.
Right.
Unless it's staged, unless it's phony. But people will follow them.
Yeah.
Because they want that companionship and association. And no one's telling them about hell.
Yeah.
It's just have this lofty ideal, follow me, and people will believe that they are a god.
What was the name of the guy who took his people out and they all drank the Kool-Aid and died? Was it Jim Jones? Was that his name?
Yeah, Jim Jones.
Yeah. And where did he take
Jones.
Down in Central America, was it? Or something like that? Or Mexico?
Guyana, I think it was.
Yeah. Guyana. And that was mentioned in Franklin Graham's book about how he went there. They were thinking maybe of establishing a Christian refuge or colony or orphanage, I forget, some kind of Christian, but it was so dark there. There was just a sense the evil that had been there, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there was so much bureaucratic objection. The government had just left it as it was,
Yeah.
except for the bodies being removed. But it was a very, very strange experience, he states. Yeah. Very, very, very dark place.
I'm sorry, is that talking about Guyana at
Yeah.
large, or okay?
That compound.
The compound.
Yeah. In Guyana. Yeah. So.
I had a similar experience years ago when I visited Kiev now, Ukraine, and being there on a Sunday and looking for a church and not finding really much of anything. There were cathedrals, which were more museums places that he visited or something like that, and just feeling that there's a sense of darkness here, and
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
kind of a sense, and who knows, I don't know the truth of it or not, but seemed to be a lack of the gospel there. So,
Mhm.